You heard Dan doesn't want to come to committee. He wants to have, here we go. Okay. Okay, good morning, folks. Thank you for your patience as we had to navigate a small fire in one of the elevators and we were just all evacuated. So, thank you for being here this morning. So, we're going to, start off with Danny, Danny, I'm presuming that that's what you'd like to be called because that's what's on my agenda. Is that correct? Or do you prefer James?
Frozen.
I
Yeah.
can
No,
jump.
you look like you're frozen. We can hear you, Ann Claire, but it looks like James might be frozen.
Or me.
James. There you go. Okay.
Got me back?
Yes, you're back.
Okay. Sorry. I'm in a small hotel room with spotty Wi-Fi.
Okay. And so my question was whether it says Danny on my agenda or what is your preference, James or Danny? I just want to make sure I'm not referring to you in the wrong way.
Danny works. My full name is James Daniel Sawtell. Everybody knows me as Danny.
Okay. All righty. Thank you so much for being here. And again, my apologies for our little upset here in the State House. So, but it made for a good news day. You know, the reporters were outside filming all of us, you know, evacuating from the building. Welcome and thank you for your comments today regarding S206, an act relating to the licensure of early childhood educators. Danny, you're up first, and then we'll speak to Anna Claire. The floor is yours, Danny.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for your time. And if I start to get a little spotty here, just let me know. But
and it's okay to turn off your it's okay to turn off your camera. It's okay to turn off your camera if
I might just do that.
Okay.
Right.
That sometimes helps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, perfect. So Danny Sawtell, I live in Manchester Center, Vermont. So I'm just going to take a minute here to read my written testimony, and then if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. So I'm appearing before you today as an advocate for early childhood ed and a supporter of S206, which would create individual licensure for early childhood educators. I serve on the boards of Northshire Day School in Manchester, which is early childhood ed center down here in Manchester Center, as well as the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children. I'm also a parent to 2 young boys. Professionally, I've been in the financial services industry now for 23 years. Which is an industry, by the way, that is heavily regulated at both the state and federal levels. I have several securities and insurance licenses as a part of my job requirements to operate as a financial services professional. And so I'd like to explain why professional regulation is just as important in early childhood education. In my field, people want to know if their financial advisor is a fiduciary, someone who is legally bound to act in their best interest. This trust is built through clear qualifications, individual regulation, and accountability. Most professionals want to do right by their clients, but without regulation, there's no way to ensure consistency or remove those who aren't suited for the job. I bring that perspective to early childhood ed. Parents trust programs with their children. It's one of the most critical responsibilities in our society, but there's no individual regulatory system to ensure quality or accountability from the individual actually spending all day with your children. Many parents don't even realize this. Instead, we rely on word of mouth that the quote program was pretty good 10 years ago when my kids went there. Well, I just have to hope and pray my children will be well cared for. And in most cases, they will be, but families deserve clear standards, transparency, and protection. Childcare is one of the biggest expenses families face, and this is certainly not unique to Vermont. I have clients all over the country, and this is a national problem we're wrestling with. Yet, without the clarity of regulation, there's no simple way to measure the quality of what they're paying for. This lack of oversight is especially dangerous for families with limited options. Childcare is a necessity, and without individual accountability, vulnerable families are left at risk. And I want to make another point tied to finances. First, childcare has been an underpaid field forever, and since it's now necessary for our economy, we treat it as a commodity instead of as a public good. So what happens when we reframe it as a public good? The answer is high quality early childhood education in any setting has a terrific return on investment. National studies show this, and I have firsthand data from Northshire Day School. We have almost a third of our children with early special needs intervention. And thanks to our teachers, and they are teachers, qualified teachers we're very fortunate to have, because of that early intervention, typically from 0 to 3, by the time they graduate out of pre-K and move into kindergarten in our public school system, many, if not all of those kids, depending on the year, no longer require those services when they get to kindergarten. And we all know as taxpayers that is particularly expensive. I'll also add that as a nonprofit, we carry that burden alone. So Northshire Day School is a community-based nonprofit, and it is very expensive for us to admit those children. But, as a service to the community, we are bound to, accept all families regardless of their ability to pay and regardless of their ability to learn at age-appropriate levels. So if all Vermont children have access to teachers with these qualifications, we could reduce public education and social service costs statewide. Thank you again for considering my thoughts. Regulating early childhood education protects families, ensures quality, and strengthens our workforce. Most importantly, it protects our children. Be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you, Danny. Appreciate that. And appreciate your, service as a board member. It's sometimes difficult to find people to serve in those roles. So thank you for doing that and being an advocate. One of the things that, you spoke to, was the regulatory environment for early childhood education. And I'm just wondering what your experience has been with the Child Development Division and their regulatory framework for early childhood education at the center.
Well, it's difficult. So I think most fields are struggling to find employees, and early childhood ed is no different. But so the issue we have really is there's no transparency into work history beyond a background check and what they tell us. And so there's certainly liability for the center, and it's borne by the center alone. So our liability insurance is somewhat significant because of that. If something happens to a child as a result of teacher negligence, well, that's on the center. That's not necessarily on the teacher. And if we have to let that teacher go, there's no tracking system that would follow them to the next early childhood ed center. So that's particularly challenging because we're in a position where, we want to hire quality educators, but, we're constantly in fear of having to close classrooms because we don't have enough teachers.
So I can appreciate the workforce challenges. I guess that my question was more specific to your experience with the Child Development Division and their licensing of centers and the qualifications that they require in those licensing, I shouldn't say license, I guess certificate, I'm not sure what it's called, but when they go through the process of approving a center and then the periodic updates that they do in terms of visitation and relicensing those centers. So I just was wondering, as a board member, if you've had any particular experience with the licensing process of the center.
Not at a, at a sort of weeds level. I mean, our executive director, certainly expresses, frustration, not with CDD specifically, but just sort of the the bureaucratic overlay of the various state agencies that we have to navigate. So, I mean, certainly, if there's a way to streamline, that would be helpful. I mean, we report to 3 different state agencies, and depending upon, various requirements for each, that can be redundant, and it can be, tricky to navigate.
Thank you. And does the center that you are affiliated with, do they offer pre-K?
We are pre-K partner, and just from a cost perspective, the other thing I'll share that a lot of people don't know is, because of teacher to child ratios, pre-K is really the only way that we generate positive cash flow. The greatest need that we see in this space is 0 to 3. We have a waiting list of about 90 children, and the vast majority of them are infant to 3.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering, there's obviously in this building and around the state, there's a lot of discussion about education reform, and pre-K is part of that discussion. And from the testimony we received on pre-K, as well as previous testimony on, the other early education space in centers and home-based care, that there's a significant reliance on pre-K funds in order to sort of help backfill the staffing ratio expenses that are incurred for the birth to 3-year-olds. And I'm just wondering, I guess what I'm saying is that there's potential impact on that pre-K space for private providers. And I'm just wondering if your board has considered, you just were talking about fiduciary responsibilities. I'm wondering if your board has considered, the potential decrease in revenue for private providers as more school districts entertain full-time pre-K and full-time sort of matching that with the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. What we're hearing around the state through this is that there's more and more school districts that are moving into that space, and that, there's only a certain number of 3- and 4-year-olds. So just trying to understand if your board is aware of those dynamics.
Yeah, we're aware of it. So obviously, we have several schools in our immediate area that offer pre-K, but obviously that's tied to school calendar, and we're a year-round pre-K program. So until we start to see schools really commit to having year-round, as it stands today, I mean, there are, there's still a shortage of slots, even in rural parts of the state.
For sure. Thank you. Other questions for this witness? Yes, go ahead. Representative McGuire and then Representative Bishop.
Yeah, thank you very much. You had mentioned within your testimony that there's roughly an 80% capacity due to staffing shortages, and mentioned the word burnout also. In your judgment, is that S206 more likely in the near term to increase, decrease, or place further constraints upon the workforce capacity?
No, I think the opposite. The fundamental issue that I see, just anecdotally and speaking with educators and our executive director, is that there is a lack of interest in the field, largely because they're being discouraged to enter it, right? So daycare is still largely looked at as babysitting. And what we hear is, people that want to go into this field are actively discouraged from doing so because it's not a professional job, and so why would you go to school and pay for tuition and books and, to enter a field that's simply babysitting, that you're underpaid? What we've seen is certainly through Act 76, We've seen about a 50% increase at Northshire Day School in families that have been eligible for CCFAP, which has actually allowed us to stabilize our finances and begin paying our teachers, begin to approach paying our teachers what we think they're worth. So, what I am gathering just from talking to our educators is that the professionalization will make this a more attractive job, not a less attractive one.
Right, so you're pretty confident that this bill is going to help increase the workforce?
I do.
All right, because the only reason I brought that one up first, because you also raised some concerns within your testimony to the ECE-1 requirements, in which may require significantly more training before an individual can enter into the classroom. So based upon that hiring experience, do you think these requirements could pose a material risk of reducing entry into the field, even if the intent is to improve the quality of what's being provided?
I mean, this is there's no Pollyanna solution where everybody's is going to work for 100% of the field, but I think in general professionalization will make it a more attractive field for newer entrants. And again, not really any different than any other fields. Our workforce is aging as well, right? And so we need more younger professionals to come in, and they're increasingly hard to find.
Thank you.
Hi, Representative Bishop.
Thank you for being with us today and for committing to working with your center and also with the statewide organization. I think due to the pandemic pressures on workforce in general, there was an increase in wages in the field, and certainly and thankfully, as you pointed out, from Act 76, there was additional increase to pay for the individuals in the field, which has historically been too low of a field, the pay in that field. I would think the natural consequence of the increased professionalization there'd be a few natural consequences, including improving quality, but I think it would put additional pressure on wages. And has your board discussed what capacity you would have or how you would generate that capacity to pay increased wages?
Well, it always falls on families, right? And so it's always a constant wrestling match, right? How do we balance, the needs to retain our educators? Because that's the other thing that's lost in this is, certainly there was wage pressure during COVID, as there was everywhere. And we were losing educators, not just to public education, we were losing educators to Dunkin' Donuts, right? So, certainly we had to raise wages and that fell on families. But again, we have seen significant stabilization with Act 76 and a big increase in our families. So outside of fundraising, which we do actively, right, to try to sort of plug the holes in the boat, it's always a balancing act. But I would say largely, if there's an increase in wages, there's an increase in costs for families.
Thank you.
Other questions for Danny? Danny, thank you so much. And if you could, please provide your comments that you were reading from earlier to us. You can send them to the email that you received to schedule your testimony today. That would be wonderful.
Perfect. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anna Claire, good morning, and thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience in dealing with our unexpected fire drill, or not drill, actual fire. Evacuation. So welcome, and the floor is yours, and tell us a little bit about your research and the organization that you're with and all of that kind of stuff.
For sure. Well, thank you for having me. Would it be okay if I share my screen?
Yes, you will receive authorization to do that momentarily.
Alrighty.
And there, for committee members, there is a presentation on our website.
Alrighty. Sorry, I had to work in a different spot today because of my little one, so I'm making it work. Can you see my presentation now?
We can, and we
Okay.
appreciate balancing the needs of family with other things. So
I know you do. I know you do. Well, this sounds like a fun committee based on what I was hearing when you all first logged on. Well, yeah. Well, thank you, Representative Garofano, and just the whole committee on Human Services. Thank you just for allowing me to comment today on S206. My name is Anna Claire Flowers, and I'm a family policy fellow with the Archbridge Institute, a think tank in DC, where our mission is to lift barriers to human flourishing. I'm also finishing up my PhD in economics right now. I'm the lead author of the 2026 State Childcare Regulations Index, which I believe has been cited in previous hearings on S206. You all have been working very hard on this bill. So I'm happy I could kind of come in and am I supposed to admit someone, maybe? You got it? Okay.
no.
Yeah. So anyway, just grateful for the opportunity and grateful that our resources have been helpful. As a working mom, I'm acutely aware of how important reliable childcare is for families. And as an economist, I've spent much of my career so far investigating the barriers that limit reliable childcare options. So what I wrote my dissertation on and why I'm working with the Archbridge Institute. I'm here to testify today because I believe S206 would jeopardize the efforts Vermonters have made toward making childcare available and affordable for all families. As you well know, since 2023, business owners and employees have been diverting income through a payroll tax for childcare subsidies. And this is partially covering the childcare bills for most working families, right? I'm amazed at all the progress, honestly, that has been made in Vermont towards those goals of affordability and accessibility. The state's investment in childcare really represents a strong commitment to seeing kids and families thrive. S206 unfortunately goes against some of these goals, in my view, to make the service affordable and accessible because it will discourage growth among the childcare workforce. We just heard Danny speaking about this. And so it's a relevant question that I think I might be on the other side of the question from him and his point of view. But we know from economics research and other fields that occupational licenses, like those suggested in S206, actually do decrease the supply of providers. And in this case, discouraging workers from entering the childcare profession, which would make an existing bottleneck situation even worse. So research has shown licenses can reduce workforce supply in a given profession by up to 27%. And as we heard from Danny, the main bottleneck in Vermont's childcare market right now is not funding, but staffing. So this is a graphic from the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children, kind of showing who S206 is relating to. But we heard from him, and there's others, other testimonies out there that I've been reading since I'm not from Vermont, but I'm in Virginia, that staffing shortages are a widespread problem. So this is a Bright Futures set of focus groups held with Vermont childcare providers and families last year. And providers spoke to this bottleneck problem, right? So staffing shortages, quote, staffing shortages were described as the single biggest challenge across all sessions. Programs continue to struggle to hire and retain qualified staff, which in turn leads to reduced hours, closed classrooms, and fewer available childcare slots, even in communities where demand remains high and funding is available. A quote from a parent here, "A spot doesn't help if you can't get there." So this supply challenge spills onto families. Even with the subsidies from CCFAP, parents feel they have few childcare options, and many in rural areas, if you think about it, might be more affected by this. They don't have options because they can't get their kids to the centers that do have available seats. Another scenario that you might be able to imagine is just a family needing more flexibility. Maybe they work the night shift, which actually other states have. We've started to see night shift care centers pop up. Maybe they just need a 12-hour day as a nurse, and there's not a subsidized spot that is available for that. So again, a spot doesn't help if you can't get there. A spot doesn't help if it doesn't meet your needs. And this is what we're hearing from families. So inconvenient location, mismatched program hours, and lack of flexibility are examples of barriers to reliable childcare that the families expressed in these focus groups. With occupational licensing hoops, added to the mix at the individual level, I think this would discourage potential workers from entering the childcare industry, and that is going to make it even harder for providers to say, oh yeah, we're going to offer flexible hours, we're going to, stay open longer, we're going to be open on government holidays, that kind of thing. It's just going to make it harder to match families' flexibility needs. So I would say my position is supply is best addressed. This bottleneck problem is best addressed by actually minimizing barriers to entry. One thing about Vermont is that we see in the Child Care Regulation Index that Archbridge has been working on, that Vermont actually has the most regulations in place working towards safety and quality, right? So this is not something that your state is lacking in. And so this is more about that professionalization question. So S206 would introduce more steps in the process of operating a childcare business, and would just divert resources, even government funding, away from families towards creating this new agency that would be born out of the bill and kind of the regulatory board. This table on my slide shows the steps that are facing, potential childcare business owners when they want to open a business. You'll see safety and quality concerns are already pretty heavily regulated in Vermont, as I mentioned. And then even on top of this list of 8 kind of steps and different qualifications and verifications, there are also the quality rating systems that many states have, and also private accreditation can also offer opportunities for providers to gain credibility. So really, it's not just word of mouth, it's all of this, and reputation and accreditation that can happen through various quality rating systems and private accreditation systems. For example, there's different networks of schools that maybe emphasize different things. Maybe they emphasize foreign language, or they emphasize being outside in nature. So parents can also look to those forms of quality accreditation for more information. This is just a look at our Child Care Regulations Index. It takes into account staff credential requirements, which we're talking about today, annual training hours, child-to-staff ratios, and maximum group sizes for shared spaces. And all of these factors affect childcare supply, access, and affordability. Now, the reason why I can applaud Vermont is because the strong approach to regulation has also been matched with a strong commitment to subsidizing childcare. So again, I think states that have really tight childcare regulations, making the industry more expensive, kind of need to match those efforts with state funding. So I applaud that. But as you can see, there's already a lot in place to try to sort of make this industry uniform and make sure that the staff are qualified. So here's a look at the current regulations on childcare staff. They are ranked 47th out of 50 in terms of childcare freedom. So if you're going towards 50th would be the most regulated first, because it's an index that says, hey, childcare freedom is going to mean there's more flexibility and more openness in that industry. Vermont already has a lot of things in place for staff. So center director needs an associate's or bachelor's degree in early childhood education, according to the current regulatory code, or a related field. Teachers leading up a class, heading up a classroom need a child development associate credential or 21 college credits in ECE related fields. And assistant teachers are required to have a high school diploma or GED. For context, other states use a range of approaches on this issue. There's a lot of variation. Some, for example, allow high school students to serve as assistant teachers before they've gotten that high school degree. Others only require a CDA credential, that Child Development Associate credential for center directors. Maybe they haven't been to college. So there's, again, a strong set of qualifications that Vermont already has in place. Now, S206 doesn't map perfectly onto existing professional titles currently in the Vermont Code. It suggests stricter regulation on childcare workers at each level that we currently have. Importantly, there won't be any opportunities for potential childcare workers with a high school diploma or GED, and this would further inhibit supply. So you can see on the screen, kind of, if we look at that assistant teacher level, we would normally have a high school diploma kind of option, but with S206, the lowest acceptable credential is that Child Development Associate, which can take up to a year to earn. So if I'm graduating high school and want to,
Anna Claire?
yes,
I'm just, I'm a little confused by that last statement because it seems contrary to what we heard from our Secretary of State's office in terms of the, and maybe it's the use of the term teacher, that might be the sort of like,
okay,
because I don't recall their testimony as saying that individuals with high school diplomas wouldn't be able to work in childcare.
okay. So maybe there's still going to be opportunities, but just not licensing opportunities. Maybe that might be
That's potential. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So I guess as it stands, maybe a better way to put it is this assistant teacher level, which would be kind of parallel with a license. It doesn't exist in the S206 kind of framework because early childhood educator 1, which would be like kind of heading up a classroom, has to have these credentials. So it doesn't specify like what to do, what centers would do below that if they would still hire unlicensed childcare professionals, which I guess is a really relevant question. So I'm just thinking from that perspective of, a high school student analyzing what are my options after high school, right? So if I've got to get technical education to become a licensed early childhood educator, then that's an investment that I could make in a range of other careers, right? So if I got to get technical education, there's going to be a lot of other careers that have better financial returns than the childcare industry does, unfortunately. We all agree this is a problem, but it's a problem that would affect, that decision for the next generation of potential childcare workers. Because even with stabilization from CCFAP, most childcare careers aren't going to offer sufficient returns, especially for, an associate's or bachelor's degree. So something to think about. And just anecdotally too, I have a very good friend who has been a childcare teacher for a few years, and she had a lot of learning disabilities, but she is excellent with kids. And so that's another kind of group of people to consider what some of these educational requirements might affect. Is just people, hey, school wasn't my thing. I've always struggled with it. But I know I love working with kids. I can get experience that way and kind of show that this is an area that they're gifted in. Another topic I want to briefly comment on is family childcare homes. So S206 includes a provision that will require family childcare providers to obtain the same level of education as center-based providers, if I'm understanding right. So right now, this sector is less regulated in Vermont, which provides opportunities to entrepreneurs without those educational credentials or lower levels of education. And we're seeing across the country that this category of childcare is shrinking, mostly because of, increasing regulatory intensity that wants to make, centers more uniform. But if you go back to kind of this graphic, there's a specification in S206 that as of 2029, family childcare providers wouldn't be allowed to apply for a license that is specific to family childcare homes, right? So it's saying kind of there's going to be like this window where if you're currently a family childcare provider, you can get that individual license, but then after 2029, you've got to kind of fall in line with these three, early childhood educator positions that are going to be, better rewarded in a center setting. So I think we're going to see, just if this bill was passed, like a big hit on these family childcare homes, which are really important to supply and really convenient, flexible, and local, right, to neighborhoods because they're situated right in those neighborhoods. So something to just draw attention to what that might look like for family childcare providers. And you may have heard other testimonies, I think, from people in that workforce. So finally, who is most affected by the changes proposed in S206? The evidence suggests it won't be evenly distributed, which I'm concerned about. While the bill aims to raise quality through stricter credentialing, research shows that those benefits don't reach families who are priced out of care altogether, or maybe aren't able to get those seats, right, that are available. When there aren't enough seats, access becomes the real issue, and more educated parents are better able to navigate the system and secure a spot. So this paper that I referenced from 2020 is following childcare reforms in Quebec, whenever they kind of rolled out universal childcare, right? And parents who had maybe the highest degrees of education were able to follow, okay, I know when that bill is going to be passed, when this program is going to be rolled out, I'm going to be the first one to sign up and secure my child a spot. Maybe they're involved in a school board or something like that to be able to have this information. So even when you have stabilization funds, there are inequalities in kind of who can access and who can secure those spots when there's a shortage of childcare. Another interesting study that's relevant here is that in addition to adding the real financial costs of being a provider in the form of new fees, there will also be more administrative tasks. The burden of meeting new requirements falls on providers, and many of these providers are women. And we actually know that female business owners spend more time dealing with regulatory hurdles, due in part, we think, to care responsibilities, right? So trying to get your kids out the door to, a meeting or to the city hall to pay a fee or to get your license renewed isn't quite as easy as it sounds. And so we've got this evidence from other kind of parts of sectors and studies on entrepreneurs and how they navigate these regulatory hurdles. So the likely result is just a system where access becomes more unequal, right? Which isn't what we want. And costs of compliance fall hardest on the providers that families are depending on. So that's what I have for you today. S206, I think, is unfortunately an insufficient solution to this supply problem, right? Vermont's worked very hard to make childcare accessible. And childcare workers deserve recognition for the important work that they do, absolutely. But occupational licensing accomplishes a different set of goals. It will disincentivize the next generation of childcare providers, and I think erode some of the progress Vermont has made on childcare access. So happy to answer any questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Anna Claire. Can you take down your presentation so we can see you better again? Great, thank you. Well, while I formulate my question, I'll ask if there are other questions if people. Go ahead, Representative McGuire.
Thank you very much. I'm actually just going to present the same two questions that I presented to the other testifier, because it seemed that your testimony is sharing that it will decrease workforce. S206 has a potential of decreasing the workforce capacity.
Yeah, I think when you add this extra step, right, for the individuals to have their own license, it adds not only time, but fees and that extra, investment in education and credentialing that may, again, introduce those same workers to other more attractive options once they've already got to put in this fixed cost of getting licensed. So of course, occupational licensure is a standard practice. Dental hygienists and real estate agents and cosmetologists all have these. But it's essentially, when you have to pay those fees and put the time in, a tax on doing that work. And in the status quo, if we already are looking for more childcare workers, adding essentially a tax on their effort isn't going to produce more interest.
I guess I would challenge the fact, the use of the word tax on their efforts. I'm not sure we would say the same thing about the cosmetologist and all of that. So I don't, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just to follow up with that. So, and also kind of hearing from your testimony that it sounds like the requirements that are aligned within S206 possibly pose a material risk on reducing entry into the field. And again, even if the intent is to improve quality. Am I accurate in hearing that was a bit of your testimony?
Yeah, so lesser childcare regulation, really regulation and quality we've not been able to establish a decisive link in the childcare field specifically. All the research, all the academic research I've read, it's, there are certain things we know about it, which is that, like I said, higher income families, the people that are able to get the spots are benefiting from fewer accidents, things like that. But then the supply question really does affect quality of the early childhood experience for kids because, if you're not able to access those seats, then you're not benefiting from the quality. So yeah, I think there's a material risk in terms of, just again, not being able to get those same, like to achieve this level of ideal that we're hoping for from the professionals, because they won't be entering the industry at the same rates.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I believe that what I heard you say, and I just want to confirm it because we had another witness who said the same thing. And so I'm just kind of like, verification of data, essentially.
Sure.
That if enacted in this way, Vermont would be the first state to require early educator licenses.
That's right.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that that's what you said.
Yeah, so we don't have data on what this might produce, right? So it would be essentially an experiment, and I was using parallel industries like the licensing from other industries that have been enacted broadly.
So through your research, are you aware of other states that are exploring licensure of early childhood educators?
New Mexico comes to mind, just because they're really expanding their agency on early childhood education. I would expect them to be exploring this issue alongside their big rollout of universal childcare. But this would be going farther than other states have gone to add individual licenses. Most do it through the center.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions for this witness? Go ahead, Representative Bishop.
I'm wondering, in your broader work, whether you've identified any states that have found a way to attach individual accountability without going to full licensure.
That's a great question. Again, what comes to mind is the QRIS systems. the quality rating systems. And I can follow up with the committee on this question. I would love to kind of look into it more, because that would be ideal, right? Is to kind of have a candidate profile that follows them around, as the earlier testimony was saying, to kind of show credibility. But as far as I'm concerned, everything is kind of happening at the center level right now, even on quality accreditation, and sort of 5-star ratings, 4-star ratings, that kind of thing. So can I follow up with you on that?
Yeah, that would be great. I agree that there's a lot that happens at the center level or but I think there's been valid points made about individuals who may not be appropriate for the field who just move on. And there's not a way to, when they apply for the next job, to identify whether there are concerns. So yeah, any additional light you can shed on that question would be appreciated.
Great, happy to.
There are comments or questions? Go ahead, Representative Cole.
Thank you. I think earlier in your presentation, like closer to the beginning, you mentioned some statistic of to the tune of 27% increase in barriers. And I wonder if you could repeat that, because I want to understand that better, where you got that number.
Yeah, for sure. So this was a study on dental hygienists.
Okay.
But it was sort of this is one of those more recent like instances of occupational regulation that spread across the country. So you know, it would have been like regulated at the practice level, and then you know the dentist or the administrators kind of verify that the dental hygienists are trained and ready to interact with patients. But then we sort of introduced this individual level credentialing and licensing. And in that particular industry, it was different in different states, but kind of the most we saw that the workforce in that industry shrink was 27% of like new kind of dental hygienists going into that profession. So again, I mentioned kind of this bill affecting the next generation of childcare providers. You know, right now, many of these childcare providers probably already have similar credentials, and they have to get this license in order to keep up their career. But we're thinking of kind of among a range of career options among kind of next generation workers, you know, which is worthwhile to get into and to kind of get the right things on your resume to be able to even try out that industry. So something to think about might be either aligning the S206 individual licensing with, you know, more closely with what's already in, you know, on the books for the center level, right? So, you know, exploring, and I'll follow up also on the question of like high school students and people holding a GED, like what they might be able to still do and participate in this industry, or at least kind of, making sure that someone who's already in this position isn't having to then go back and get more education just to continue doing the job that they're doing right now.
Thank you, Anna Claire. Any final question? Thank you for being here this morning, and thank you for your patience with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Alrighty.
much for having me.
Okay, Lynn, thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience with our issue this morning. We had a fire situation, so we all had to evacuate earlier. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it, and are interested in your comments on S206.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lynn Ross. I worked in the early childhood field for approximately 40 years, 36 of those here in Vermont. I worked for the Vermont Child Development Division from approximately 2010 until I retired at the end of July 2025. My most recent position was as an early childhood and after-school systems specialist, focused primarily on the Vermont Early Childhood and After-School Professional Development System, and was in that position approximately 13 years. Prior to that, I was a childcare licensing field specialist, and I visited many regulated childcare centers and family childcare homes across northern Vermont in that capacity. So I'm here to share my experience from my perspective from that experience. Sorry about that. I've been following the progress of the work that led to the creation of S206, as well as some of the testimony that's been offered. And I enthusiastically support the creation of the early childhood profession in Vermont, and I'm excited to see that it has come along as far as it has. And while I do support the need for this legislation and recognize all of the work that has happened thus far, I still have questions that I'm not sure have been answered in relation to setting up this new system. I bring these thoughts up to the committee in case any additional information is needed before passage. I think there is still a need to ensure that outreach about this legislation has reached a broad and representative portion of the approximately 8,000 individuals in the early childhood workforce. This includes consideration of whether communications have effectively reached center-based staff who may not receive direct mailings, and whether outreach efforts have extended beyond existing mailing lists to engage those not already connected to parts of the early childhood system. It is also important to ensure that opportunities for feedback have been widely accessible across different settings and roles. I know that the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children, or Vermont AEYC, has done significant work to engage the workforce, as Rachel Hunter testified this morning. Susan Titterton testified on Tuesday that over 1,000 individuals have participated in various outreach efforts, which is statistically more than a representative number and significant. However, for my most recent position with the state, using a full mailing list of all regulated programs in the state, it was still not possible to reach individuals who are staff employed at a regulated child care center unless a program director shared that information with them. In terms of workforce qualifications, consideration should be given to the number of currently employed staff in centers and family child care programs who may need to increase their qualifications to maintain their positions. Based on the most recent Child Development Division workforce data, there may be a significant number of individuals, potentially at least 525 that I saw, who are currently qualified as staff able to lead a group of children, but would not meet new requirements to maintain that position. And I included a separate workforce data document with an excerpt from that report and added some notes about these impacted positions, which you should have, I believe, uploaded to the website.
We do, thank you.
Yes. It will be important to ensure these individuals are clearly informed of the changes, understand the expectations, and have the ability to access support if needed to comply with the new requirements. Retention of these educators is a key consideration, as barriers may extend beyond simply having enough time to complete additional education. We're fortunate that between CCV and the work through Vermont AEYC, we have a good educational foundation to build upon in our current system, as you've already heard about through previous testimony. The cost of supporting educators in obtaining additional qualifications is an important factor. The existing supports, such as the Vermont Teach program and the Vermont Early Childhood Apprenticeship program, both administered by Vermont AEYC, are wonderful programs with well-evidenced success, but they currently serve a limited number of participants. Meeting the needs of a potentially larger group of impacted educators would likely require significant additional investment to ensure access to education, training, and support. As qualifications requirements increase, consideration should be given to whether adequate incentives are in place to support workforce participation and advancement during all phases of implementation. And I know this committee has been looking at that. Without an agreement from program directors to ensure compensation and/or benefits will be augmented following educational advancement, educators who attain additional credentials may not see corresponding increases in pay or benefits. I know that Vermont AEYC also spoke to compensation during their testimony, and they are much more connected to work being done related to this. The impact on family childcare providers warrants careful consideration, and I know that some work has been done on this already when the bill was before the Senate. Many family childcare providers enter the field to care for their own children and often work extended hours, making it challenging to pursue additional coursework. Ensuring that pathways to professional licensure are accessible and achievable, particularly in rural areas where childcare options are limited, will be crucial to maintaining supply. While there are legacy considerations included in the legislation, those are due to expire on January 1st, 2029. I understand that there have been amendments offered regarding onboarding family childcare providers after this time. There may also be value in exploring flexible pathways for entry into the field, potentially aligned with a system such as STARS that allow individuals to begin operating at an entry-level qualification while working toward higher credentials over time. Careful attention to the language of the bill is important to ensure clarity and avoid unintended consequences. An example of that is how exemptions are defined. Are family childcare programs who offer after-school only services also included in the after-school program exemption, or is that only for programs operating under an after-school program license? Another example is the timing of licensure requirements. Clear guidance on whether individuals may work while their license or transitional license is under review will be important for programs facing staffing challenges. In addition, coordination between regulatory entities will be important to ensure clarity and consistency in how compliance with licensure requirements is monitored and enforced. In closing, I want to reiterate that I wholeheartedly support professionalizing the early childhood workforce. It is long overdue, and I've been advocating towards this goal for most of my early childhood career. My purpose in coming here today is to bring up some questions I've had about the significant system change so that we all have a more complete understanding of the full impact of passing this legislation, which is designed to improve the quality of care and professionalize the field without losing our capacity to serve children and families. As evidenced by the testimony by Building Bright Futures, the system should ensure the pipeline of new early educators remains strong and sustainable, and I agree. I feel that unless we have considered all of the potential impacts, we may compromise our success. This is important for the benefit of the workforce, which has been so grossly undervalued for decades, and ultimately important for the benefit of children, families, and the communities that are served. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lynn, and thank you for being thoughtful about what you see in the bill and what the many years that you've had in the profession and the variety of different positions you've held and how this could be helpful, but also at the same time, some cautionary notes about some of the things that maybe need some additional clarification. So that's really very helpful. Questions from committee members? Go ahead, Representative Bishop.
Two questions, answer them in the order that's easiest for you. One is if you sent a second document along that's got a table with some data in it. I was wondering if you could just expand a little bit on what that's showing us. That's one question. And the second is, I'm curious if you're aware of any systems in place or have any thoughts on how we may be able to have personal accountability for the individuals who work in the field that may be something short of full licensure.
Really good question. I'll start with the first question about the table. The workforce data that you see was part of the workforce report from the Child Development Division. And what I saw in terms of the requirements for an early childhood educator 2 are that they require an associate's degree. So there are 3 categories right now that are captured in the workforce data report of individuals that right now can lead a classroom or a group of children, but who would not qualify for the ECE 2. So they would need to work toward building those qualifications. So that's what I meant to show in that. I'm sorry if that was confusing.
Nope, that's great. Thank you.
Sure. And in terms of other types of systems that might hold accountability, I really am not sure about that. I think that the childcare licensing regulations do a good deal with that, and the Child Development Division has been working with Northern Lights to help review qualifications, and there are really consistent standards right now about how the qualifications are reviewed and entered into the state's database, BFIS, Bright Futures Information System, so that licensors can see what the qualifications are when they go and do a licensing visit. So they do review that information prior to the visits and check on qualifications of individuals in the field already.
I guess to put a finer point on the question is, if there is a bad actor, if you will, the center gets the ding, if you will, but it's ultimately an individual within that center. And there isn't something currently in place that allows that information to follow the individual who may move to the next town or move to another part of the state and look for a job and get a job in a center without that new employer having insight, if you will, into that individual's past that may be of concern.
I think that may be correct. That would be a good question to ask the Child Development Division about in terms of how that is tracked. If they go into a program and look at a violation related to some staff behavior, I know there is an opportunity within BFIS to put a red flag on certain things, but I'm not sure if that only applies to programs and not individuals. It may. The Bright Futures information systems, as I'm sure you all know, really needs updating. And that's been something that's been in the works for a long time. So it could be that there's a potential there within the system to flag an individual, but I just don't know if that's in the plan or not.
Thank you.
Representative Garofano.
Thank you, Lynn. It's so nice to see you in this capacity. A question about, and I asked Rachel this earlier, about Northern Lights, and in your experience, like how do you see that fitting in with the licensure, and will it be needed as much as it's used right now? Is there any opportunity to streamline that or maybe reduce some of that investment because folks are going to be more have a higher level of education? So just kind of understanding what the levers are.
Well, the piece that they're doing right now in terms of looking at qualifications would, potentially move over to the new system. So there is that piece of work that wouldn't need to be done anymore by Northern Lights. But Northern Lights offers a lot more for the field, as Rachel was saying, in terms of some the training that they offer. They offer a lot of training that's really relevant toward the day-to-day working with children in the field. And it allows many people to get a refresher on certain topics and so forth in various formats. So I feel like there's still a role for Northern Lights to play for sure in terms of the ongoing professional development of the field. And even when people have licensure, I don't know what the renewal qualifications are going to be. That's going to need to be built within the system. But it could be that there's a certain number of training hours that they need to have. And also what Northern Lights offers is an opportunity for individuals currently working in the field to meet together in groups and have really relevant conversations, peer-to-peer support, that type of thing. And so it's a really good hub for providing that type of information.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Lynn? Thank you so much, Lynn, and thank you for all your work throughout your career for early childhood education. Really appreciate you being here today.
And hope retirement's going great.
Great. Thank you all so much. I appreciate seeing you today. Have a good day.
All righty, take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, our next witness is Shabnam. Shabnam, thank you. Nolan, who is the director of the King Street Center. Thank you so much for being here this morning. And we're almost back on time. That's a little bit behind now. So we appreciate your thoughts and comments about S206.
Well, thank you for having me. I will do my best to keep you on time. So, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. And as you know, I'm Shabnam Nolan. I'm the Executive Director of King Street Center in Burlington. At King Street, we serve children as young as 18 months through high school alongside their families. Our early childhood program is not just a place for care, it's a place where children build trust, language, identity, and a sense of belonging, and this shapes their entire trajectory. We're also a Head Start program for our early childhood program, meaning that every slot in both the toddler and preschool program are for Head Start participants. And that's a responsibility we hold with deep care. And it's why I really want to start first by saying that King Street Center believes that early childhood educators deserve to be recognized as professionals and supported as such. Our educators deserve recognition, clear pathways for advancement, and compensation that reflects the critical role they play in our communities. Right now, as you all know, the early childhood field is struggling with staffing, both across Vermont and the country. 3 preschool classrooms in Burlington closed actually in just the last month, and so the crisis is still very much here. I believe we need to be careful that as we recognize these educators as professionals through policy, and I don't really know a caregiver who really doesn't see them as professionals, that we don't unintentionally create barriers that will further reduce the number of people able to access this profession. Just as important, we must ensure that any policy choice we make today does not disproportionately impact our immigrant communities. And at King Street Center, in case you don't know, the majority of our youth and families are from the immigrant communities in Burlington. As we all know, our immigration population is one of the few, if not only growing populations in Vermont, and they're critical to the future of Vermont's economy. They're essential to our programs and communities, and I believe if we're not careful, we risk losing them in this profession, as many may face barriers around language, credential recognition, and access to higher education pathways. As an organization that operates every day in these classrooms with real workforce constraints, we just want to offer some questions and considerations for you as you advance the bill. First, we believe we must preserve accessible entry points into the workforce. Today, our ability to serve children depends on our ability to be flexible to build and sustain a workforce in a constrained labor market. At King Street, our early childhood classrooms are intentionally staffed by a mix of experienced educators and emerging professionals. So individuals who bring both formal training and a deep lived passion for working with young children. Many of our educators at King Street enter the field through accessible pathways, and we invest in their growth over time, supporting them in building credentials while they are also contributing meaningfully in the classroom. What has not worked at King Street is hiring educators with a bachelor's degree in early childhood education without any cultural understanding or real-world experience. In other words, it's been our experience that a degree alone does not result in an educator that meets the needs of our community at King Street. Having flexibility as an organization in our approach to hiring is critical to ensuring our workforce reflects the cultural and linguistic background of the families that we serve. And that's really foundational to children's sense of belonging and development. While the bill does not explicitly require licensure at the point of hire, there is ambiguity in the language about whether programs will be able to continue hiring individuals and supporting them in working toward credentials, or whether credentialing will become an expectation to be hired. Now, I have not been a part of the many conversations that you all have had in the legislature, and so perhaps this has been addressed, but not being there regularly and not knowing if that's true is important to bring up for us that ambiguity in the way we interpret it could be a potential future barrier if it's not clarified. So we believe it needs to be addressed, because without flexible entry points into the workforce, we really risk narrowing the pipeline into the field, and at a time where we're already struggling to staff classrooms. So if programs are no longer able to hire educators on a plan to complete credentials over time, it is going to significantly limit who we can bring into the profession. We must also support people and programs while educators advance their credentials. It is unclear to us whether there'll be any support for organizations going forward in this transition. When an educator leaves the classroom to pursue coursework, training, or degree attainment, we still have to run the program. We still need to meet ratios. We still need to ensure continuity of care for children. And we still need to maintain those safe, stable classrooms. Without additional support, it creates a tension for us. We want to invest in staff, but we cannot remove them from the classroom without backfilling them. And in today's workforce environment, that backfill is extremely difficult to find. It's not only a staffing challenge for us, it's also a significant operational expense. We already invest in our staff by providing paid time for credentialing, we adjust schedules, we try to backfill classrooms, and all of that does come at a cost to the organization. If we're going to have educators having to step away from the classroom to get additional credentialing, we're going to need to have substitutes, and that will be an additional cost for us. In addition, it does not, it seems to not, in S206, clearly define how substitute or temporary staff will be treated under the new licensure structure. If a lead teacher is out of the classroom working toward the credentialing attainment that's required under the bill, who is going to step into that role? Will substitutes or float staff be required to hold the same level of licensure? Without clarity, programs may find themselves unable to identify qualified coverage, which would further strain what is already a limited staffing capacity. Beyond staffing, there is a broader financial reality that programs will face. As credential expectations increase, there seems to be an appropriate expectation that compensation will increase as well. However, the bill does not address how programs are expected to absorb those increased personnel costs. Early childhood programs are already operating on thin margins, and without new sustained investment, it's unclear how we would be able to meet both higher credentialing standards and offer wages that reflect those expectations. 2 years ago, King Street greatly benefited from Act 76, and we used the increase in those subsidy dollars exactly how it was intended, which was to increase salaries for our educators. That is what we did. And that essentially helped us get them from far too below a reasonable wage to a somewhat reasonable wage. So we've used those dollars as intended already, which is why there's some question for us of how we would continue to increase that salary. So it's unclear how we could do more at this point without further investment, especially if the expectation comes from or becomes a state mandate that will increase salaries further. But these are real ongoing operational costs that many programs are not currently resourced to absorb. And at King Street, we are in a unique situation. We may be able to actually increase our fundraising efforts to address the rising costs, but the majority of early childhood programs will not be able to because most do not utilize fundraising as part of their financial model. We believe that if we move forward with this, it is critical that the state invest in substitute and floating staff capacity, paid release time for educators, resources directly to the programs to maintain classroom stability. Without these types of investments, we risk becoming we risk the requirements becoming barriers rather than supports. We cannot have professionalizing the workforce come at the cost of destabilizing our classrooms. What is of particular importance to us is ensuring that we have an inclusive and representative workforce in Vermont. At King Street, many of our educators come from the same communities as the children we serve, including immigrant and refugee families. This is essential for us. And quite frankly, it has taken years of building towards that, and we're just finally there now. And this is a tremendous benefit for children when they see themselves reflected in their teachers. We believe deeply that our programs are stronger when educators understand the cultural context, language, and lived experiences of the families we serve. So we would like to raise a question for consideration. And I don't know if you all have talked about this already. However, the question is, how will S206 impact the ability of the immigrant community members to enter and remain in the early childhood workforce? I'd like to share a story with you. One of our staff members, we'll call her Sarah, holds a bachelor degree in psychology from her home country and has prior teaching experience. However, because her degree cannot be easily verified through traditional systems, she is currently working as an aide in our program. Sarah is a hard worker. She's great with kids. She wears a hijab, and little girls who wear hijabs can look at her and feel like they belong in that classroom. She's incredibly invaluable and contributes to a stronger educational experience for our children. Sarah being an aide is not a reflection of her ability. It's a reflection of the barriers within the system. While Vermont has a process for recognizing foreign credentials through OPR, that process is not automatic and often requires costly third-party evaluations, extensive documentation, and additional coursework. For many educators, particularly those in early childhood, these barriers can make it difficult to translate prior education and experience into recognized credentials. So, if we're looking at S206 as a transformational bill to help us expand and retain a high-quality workforce, then we should not leave this problem out of the solution. We should ensure that pathways for internationally trained educators are not only available, but actually accessible and realistic for the workforce this bill is intended to support. For someone who has recently arrived in Vermont with a pathway into early childhood education, what will it look like under this bill? Will the prior education be recognized? Will there be accessible supported pathways? Or will we create barriers that turn individuals away who would otherwise be incredible educators? As you all know, many immigrant educators, including our own at King Street, did not go through the U.S. higher education system, and requiring advancement through those systems as the only pathway to advancement in the field can create barriers that are not about their ability, but about access. We also need to consider that access, specifically language access. If English is not someone's first language, their ability to meet credentialing requirements may depend heavily on whether those pathways are supported by programs or expected to be completed independently. Could create some serious barriers for this population. As I said in the beginning, immigrant communities are one of the fastest growing populations in our state, and they're critical to the future of this workforce. So as we strengthen the profession, we must ensure we are not narrowing who has access to it. And we should see this transformational bill as an opportunity to strengthen entry into the workforce for our immigrant communities who are the growing communities in Vermont. Also incredibly important to us is to build in an equity review into the policy. It's easy for us to sit here today, put all of our intentions on the table. They're good intentions. We all clearly deeply believe in elevating the field, and we believe in investing in educators. And we believe Vermont has the opportunity to lead in building a stronger early childhood system. At the same time, and you all know this very well, implementation matters deeply. We cannot make the mistake that so often happens in policy, which is that good intent, but then harmful implementation occurs. We cannot risk further reducing a workforce that is struggling as it is. And promises that it won't is not enough. We believe it is critical to build an equity review into the policy. There should be language that requires there to be an ongoing evaluation of how the system impacts workforce diversity and access so that we can ensure the intent is actualized in the implementation. If we're going to take the early childhood field in the opposite direction of most professions today that are adding flexible pathways and reducing educational barriers for entry into the profession, then we need to take the time to get it right. We should be using CDD to survey every early childhood education program and staff person to see first if they even know this bill is being considered, because I will tell you at King Street they do not. And second, asking them how it will impact them. We should not be relying on a few voices for what is a serious shift in the field that has implications for how we hire, support, and sustain our workforce. If we move forward without addressing workforce entry pathways, classroom stability during credentialing attainment, and equitable access for a diverse workforce, we risk creating unintended consequences that could reduce access for children and families. This bill has a strong vision, and it's a vision that we at King Street support. So we believe with thoughtful adjustment and investment, it can also be a sustainable vision. Thank you for your time and your leadership, and of course, your commitment to Vermont's children and families. Be happy to continue the conversation and serve as a resource moving forward and to answer any of your questions that I can.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful testimony. We do have a few questions, so go ahead, Representative Garofano.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shabnam. Nice to see you. You talked a little bit earlier in your testimony about substitutes and like having substitutes available if folks are getting their credentialing or some of the requirements within the bill. Can you talk a little bit about, what is your experience getting subs now? Like, is, just, are
Yeah.
there a lot of subs available? Is that something that, is easily accessible by centers such as yours?
No, there are no subs. There are no subs available. And when we tried to use subs as a model to backfill our classrooms, we failed miserably. And in fact, what we ended up doing to address that problem is hiring a full-time sub. So we actually have a staff person that serves that purpose as a full-time employee, because the reality is in early childhood education, somebody is always out, whether it's for personal reasons or they're sick because of, snotty noses in the classroom. There's somebody always out. And so we have found that by having a full-time staff person, we rely less on subs because we've built it into the model now. And that costs a considerable amount of money to do so. So we can only do so much of that. And I don't know if other programs can do it at all. Because like I said, for us, we fundraise, and that is incredibly unique.
Thank you. Other questions? All right. Thank you for very thoughtful testimony, and appreciate the depth to which you went into, while you support the intent of the bill, about some of the things that need to be considered, while we're undertaking this change, as this bill moves along. So it's really, really helpful to have the specifics about how it will impact both individuals who don't have English as their primary language, and from the perspective of people running programs that are already impacted by the lack of available staff for the things that you highlighted. So we appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay. Okay, committee. We are scheduled for the floor at 1. We have third reading on 2 of our bills. One of those bills is related to 293. Do I have that? 239. I think I developed dyslexia. I'm not sure. So there was a little snafu on the floor yesterday with the Appropriations Committee. The member did not actually report on the Appropriations Committee amendment. And so but we voted on it. And so that was a little bit of a snafu. So there's going to be clarification of that on the floor. So just don't be surprised. They worked that out with the House clerk just yesterday or this morning or something. I'm not sure exactly when, but so the Representative Mulrooney will stand up and he will give the report from the House Appropriations Committee on their amendment. And I expect probably the speaker will say something about, how the procedure kind of went a little sideways yesterday. And then we will be back here after floor hearing more on S206, and we'll be hearing from the community college, and we'll be hearing from youth development at YMCA. So thank you for being here, and have a good lunch. See you on the floor at 1.